there was a reprieve of sorts for mortgage holders today. While rates didn't come down, at least the RBA hasn't raised them yet. The cash rate has been left at 4.35%. But don't hold your breath waiting for a reduction. While interest rates are on hold for now, economists say the door has still been left open for an increase later in the year if inflation remains stubbornly high. Judo Bank's Chief Economic Advisor, Warren Hogan, joins me now. Warren, thanks for your time. Is this the calm before the storm? Rates on hold, but do you think they could go up in the near future?
Yeah, hi, James. Thanks for having me on the show. I think that's what the governor was sort of intimating, is that this inflation risk, they're on high alert. I don't know how you can read it any other way than that, there's a real chance they might have to raise rates. They're showing extreme patience. They've got a very different strategy to what would traditionally be followed. That is, you really lean into inflation. And of course, this is what other central banks have got. The RBA's cash rate, 4.35, as you just showed, compared to New Zealand at 5.5 and the US at 5.5. We're actually taking a very different path. And of course, if it doesn't work, and we're getting evidence this year that the economy is proving resilient and inflation is proving sticky, then the question is, what's next? And of course, I think with the message today was that we may see another rate hike.
The governor was quite careful to say, it could go this way, it could go that way. But of course, everybody is listening for the hidden messages, what's between the lines. You say that it could well go up. What were the things she said specifically that gave that impression? And do you think she was deliberately trying to prepare people for a possible rate rise in the future?
Look, I think she was trying to send that message without saying it. And it is quite perplexing. And of course, we're learning about this governor. She's only been doing the job for a while. And of course, we've got this sort of big overhaul happening at the RBA. Even though the legislation hasn't passed, she's actually getting on with sort of, changing the way the place operates. So we're still learning what she's sort of doing. And today was a little bit confusing. I must admit, I was sort of trying to really get to the bottom of it. Central bankers are always a little bit opaque. They don't want to say too much. And I think that's a key part of her strategy, is not to get put into a corner. The biggest mistake they've made lately is that 2024 guidance from the pandemic with Phil Lowe. But I think the message coming through is we see what's happening in the economy, which is strong employment growth, inflation showing signs of stabilising at 4%, way too high, much higher than their target. And they can't walk away from this because, of course, their credibility will be damaged if they're not seen to be on top of what's happening in the economy. So, look, we'll learn more about how she wants to play this, but they've made it quite clear that next quarterly inflation number, which comes out in late July, is absolutely critical. And if that comes in like it did in Q1, the number we got in late April, as around 1%, I just don't think they can walk away from that, and I think they'll probably have to hike rates. And the issue actually is with all this sort of government spending, which they noted in their statement today, is actually whether they're going to have to do multiple rate hikes, because the economy actually is proving resilient and it's about to get a big injection of money from state and federal governments from 1 July.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the fact that she did reference big spending in the federal budget. And of course, we've just had a Queensland budget. I think they've handed out something like $11 billion in incentives for people to vote for Stephen Miles to win office. So it was interesting that the RBA governor did mention that as being a factor that may mean interest rates stay high. Speaking of budgets, Labor's second budget was announced today in New South Wales. And it certainly continues a trend of rising state debt. This is the New South Wales Labor's second deficit budget, and they predict operating deficits for the next 4 years of the forward estimates. So that would make 6 deficits in a row. I wanted to ask you, have state governments lost the ability to constrain debt and run surpluses? It seems like no one's able to do it anymore.
Yeah, there certainly isn't a lot of budget surpluses going around, and I think the thing that I'm worried about with the government sector is it's just getting very large. We can see from the national accounts, the GDP figures, that government consumption across all levels of government, and when they call it consumption, that means their operating spending, is at a record proportion of the economy at around 22%. It's taken a big step up from really what it was, averaging around 18, 19% all through the 80s, 90s, noughties, last decade. It's been happening for about 10 years, but it's the biggest step up in government spending as a proportion of the economy since the early 70s, since the Lyndon Johnson Great Society, Whitlam, all that stuff. So government's getting bigger. And of course, the other side of that is the tax take is getting bigger. So income taxes that we're paying are back to where they were when Howard and Costello introduced the GST. So we've actually still got the GST, but income tax is back where it was when they brought it in. And of course, this is a potential big shift in our economy. It's going to squeeze out the private sector, particularly around finding staff. So yeah, the government today in New South Wales, I think it was an okay budget, but there was a big shift up in spending, about $5 billion a year. And of course, they're going to be deficits for as far as the eye can see. And of course, debt's going from about 100 billion up to about 140.
Gee, Warren, you've done nothing to encourage me at all this evening. Thanks a lot for that. Warren Hogan, I really appreciate your time as always.